got a little bit of nervous energy, so I'll stand up for a minute to set the stage. But man, I feel so fortunate to be able to be at this event. I came in the morning, and so I wanted to share just a couple, I guess, observations and things I heard from the previous speakers. So relational was one I heard, collaborative, optimistic energy, reflection, and not only reflection, but using that reflection to how can we refocus our energies now that we're back together and talking about these topics. So I know, individually, I have a couple solutions, but I know collectively we have a whole lot of solutions. And that's what we're going to try to get to and really nail down intentional investing, which is kind of oxymoron because it's pretty nuanced to each individual's goals and values. But so one definition, I can't make this up. Last night I was, you can go one slide. Yeah, just leave it there. So I'm reading to my daughter, she's 8 years old. It's 9 o'clock, I say, all right, Elsie, I gotta get downstairs. She's like, well, where are you going? I was like, well, I have to work on this intentional investing panel. And she's like, what's intentional investing? I was like, I get in 5 seconds to try to explain it to her. And she's like, oh, it's just investing in what matters, right? And so literally you can't, I had to distill that down. You just distill it down to an 8-year-old, right? And that's really what it's about. And so hopefully what we're gonna try to achieve here is not only trying to help define it for everybody in the crowd, but offering solutions for how you can implement it either in your individual lives or with your organizations that you work for. So some people, I know throughout my career, so the last 15, 16 years, I've seen this big evolution between green solutions, clean tech. There's been a lot of evolutions. And I mean, I think most of us know too, there's been now with the momentum, there's been a lot of greenwashing and there's a lot of, money grab from actors that maybe don't have like the vision that necessarily we do have in this building. So I think listening to Susanna talking at Oregon Food Bank and her quote about taking the next step, I think intentional investing is the next step to thinking about impact, sustainability, things like that, and driving towards what you want the most. Let me think here. Let's move. I want to bring in these two wonderful people because I like them both very much. Let's move to the next slide. One more. Okay, so one quick poll. Put your hand up, I guess, if you have any kind of retirement account, child savings account, spouse account. Okay. How many, keep your hands up, sorry. How many do you know all the companies that are in there? I mean, put your hands down if you know all the companies. Okay. Yeah, so it gets confusing because it goes back to intentional investing is if we leave it up to the company that's maybe administrating or setting up your 401k and savings, you're putting money in and you're saving and it's growing, but you don't necessarily know really what you're supporting, right? And we can't completely separate all our investments, but there's a lot of ESG funds out there that you could purchase, that I can purchase, that they're top 10 holdings. So the top stocks that they're holding are Chevron, Meta, Microsoft, and some of them might be doing a great job from a sustainable aspect, and some kind of rig it in terms of what the guidelines are. And actually, the B Corp has a higher stringency hurdle than the SEC does for companies to develop and show ratings, which is great for B Corp. It's pretty disappointing that the SEC hasn't caught up. So let's go to one last slide, and I'm gonna be quiet. I think we all know, one, Jason works for a nonprofit. We have a lot of nonprofit clients. Nonprofit and charitable organizations, they can't do it themselves, and so I heard a lot of themes in these events today saying, look, we've got to have government buy-in, we've got to have nonprofit buy-in, and we've got to have private capital buy-in. And that's the only way we're going to actually solve these big solutions that we're trying to figure out and big problems that are looming. Next slide. Okay, so I'll leave this here while we talk, and I will quickly turn it over to both Caroline and Jason. Caroline, if I just start with you, would you mind giving everybody a quick background of who you are, why you do what you do, how you grew up, and just your passion.
Just real quick, yeah. Who am I, how I grew up, and what's my passions? Okay, I feel like I'm on like a dating show right now. So I grew up, I'll kind of highlight some of the key moments, because I think part of this too is, everybody who's in this room is thinking through, how do you take your intentionality or what you care about, your North Star, and leverage that to find a way to put capital towards something that also provides returns, not just on the impact, but on the capital side. So I'll talk about my own personal journey getting there. So I grew up on the East Coast. I spent a couple years in Southeast Asia. After my undergrad, I came back and I landed in a place, rural West Virginia. It was for love. He's my husband now, but at the time it was pretty jarring. But I bring that up because at that time I worked for my first startup there, and it was this woman who ran 3 companies and she was starting a 4th, and she asked me if I wanted to help her start. I think I worked for like $10 an hour and just hustled my butt off, but I loved every second of it. Was obsessed with just the entrepreneurial experience. But more importantly, I saw how at that time she employed over 400, 500 people. And that was incredibly impactful in that community, because those are people that would have probably otherwise gone to a coal mine. So I knew at that point my North Star was, I want to be part of entrepreneurship, because I believe that building companies can truly change communities, and however you define that community. Fast forward, got an MBA, started a company, rolled it up, went into tech and management consulting, ended up working at Nike, and very far away from entrepreneurship. Very far away from this kind of North Star community impact, and wanted to find a way to get back to that place. I was in a position where, not making a ton of money, but by all means doing well and was accredited, and I wanted to start to learn, how do I invest? So I did kind of what Matt talked about at first. I just got more intentional about looking at where my retirement accounts were actually and what that would look like. And I felt like I did what I could on that end. And then I thought about, where can I donate money? But then I really thought about, what does it mean to invest money and invest in startups, because that was core to me, was the entrepreneurial aspect of building companies. So I reached out to one of my previous mentors, who was managing partner at Rogue, and I said, I want to learn everything I can about startup investing. And he was fantastic. He taught me the ropes, and then I ended up joining Rogue, and we ended up starting a fund just to invest in women, and I can get into all the reasons why and the stats and the impact there. But as part of that journey, I realized I really got to tie in not only my belief that starting companies can fundamentally change communities, but I realized the power of capital, private market capital. Just to highlight some of this for you who might not know, generally about 2% of all companies in the US are venture backable. Most companies are not. But the impact that it has in our society is pretty significant, in the sense that when we look at from public companies from the 1970s, many public companies that make up your portfolios, over 40% were venture backed at one point. In the tech area, over 60% were venture backed at one point. And we recognize that only 2% of all VC dollars go to women, and if you're any other sort of minority, that's even less. That's a huge impact that private capital VC has on our overall US society, the fabric of those companies, how they grow, who they hire, and the contribution that has to our GDP. Recognizing this, I thought, it's this tiny slice, but I'm gonna go all in on that tiny slice, because I wanna start at the very beginning when that company grows, so that hopefully we can change the makeup of what those public companies look like tomorrow.
See what happens when you ask one question? Thanks for that. Jason, a little background on yourself and why you joined MISO and what it's all about.
Sure, yeah. I grew up in Jacksonville, Oregon, and have lived here most of my life. And it wasn't until I was an adult that I actually kind of got to really learn the history of Oregon and with how we treated indigenous communities and some of the the systemic racism that has gone on. And because I started my career in banking, and they don't talk about that at all. So I had a long commercial lending background, and I got really tired of making old white men more money. So I went to work for the Northwest Health Foundation, where I got the opportunity to really travel around communities in Oregon and hear the challenges that communities are facing. And it just kind of connected with my lending background, that the power of an entrepreneur system to use capitalism for good, to break cycles of poverty, to improve community resiliency, to create jobs, intergenerational wealth, just the power that providing entrepreneurship opportunities to communities it has, and seeing that has just been fantastic. So that's why I'm at MISO.
Right. You mind telling everybody just about MISO and their mission and how they could get involved potentially? Yeah, so MISO's mission is really to empower historically underserved communities and entrepreneurs through both technical assistance, education, and lending. So it's kind of a wrap-around program where we're helping from the conceptual stage, from a single mom who's good at baking to designing a business plan to education on how to do your finances, how to do digital marketing. And then when they're ready, we can give them a loan. And the ultimate goal is to develop a business plan and training that eventually they'll be bankable and can grow and create community wealth. That's great. I'm kind of playing moderator / panelist. So one thing I want.
What does Arnerich do?
Yeah, I can talk about. So Arnerich we have 2 channels of clients. We have high net worth clients, as well as foundation endowments. I actually met Jason at Northwest Health Foundation. So what we try to do there is put our dollars where our speech is, right? And so, for example, we invest probably 30 to 40% of our clients' capital into private, mostly early stage endeavors. So, for example, I was thinking about the Love Bottle story, and I wanted to get in touch with her because we have an investment called Source Water that we backed early on. A founder named Cody Friesen came out of Arizona State University, and without getting over my skis, the simplest way I can describe it is he developed a version of using panels or solar panels to pull down condensation from the air and then create potable water. So think of it almost as like an air conditioner that drips and pulls that water down condensation wise. But we were early backers with Cody. They've been very successful taking that water with a mission, not just in the US, but taking it to countries that have an earthquake or natural disasters, and planning up shops there and getting clean water to people that can't reach it. So that's one example of an investment we would do. The other real passion I have too is on the life sciences side. So think of biopharma and biotech companies, as well as ag science companies at that early stage, to think about how can we solve for healthcare and how can we solve for the lack of food. Going back to Oregon Food Bank session, I think we can do a lot better at the cutting edge science side of improving the crop yield on our current food supply in the US, but also working with countries in South America and others that export a predominant amount of our calories across the world. So I think that's very important. And then within healthcare, obviously, it goes without saying, solving for unmet needs for people is huge. One thing I wanted to drill in and just mention is an aspect that we don't think about is, one, the proper we're talking about representation here. And I don't know if you guys probably know Ambien, the sleep pill, but early on, Ambien had a lot of issues with women overdosing on it. And it traces back to women and minorities are underrepresented in clinical trials. So basically a pill made for Jason and I is not equal to what it would be right for Caroline or somebody else. And so affecting change at that level where I'm going to go to that biotech company and say, hey, this is what you're developing, whether it's for cancer, kidney disease, whatever, but we need to make sure you run the trials correctly, and not only run the trials correctly, but make sure that the population is properly diverse and it's representing the country and the globe. So anyways, that's like my little rant. But let's get back to, I am really interested in hearing about more of what MISO and Rogue is doing. So Caroline, just talk a little bit about when you go out there and talk and look for companies, right? And look for founders, what are the opportunities that you come across that make you feel really optimistic, and then what are some of the challenges that are still embedded in this kind of old way of thinking?
Yeah, so just to raise a hand, how many of you guys are like pretty familiar with the venture capital market? All right, not a whole lot. Okay, I'm gonna break this down. So, and I'll be just real honest. So the VC market, 92% of the decision makers in the venture capital market are white cis men between the ages of 35 to 50 who went to the same exact 10 schools. It is in venture, of course, as you get later and companies grow and mature, there's more numbers to look at, discounted cash flows, and you can make investments really based off of more objective measures. In the earliest stages, there's not as many objective measures, so it's more subjective. Do you believe in the founder? Is the founder well connected enough? Is the market big enough? But really, do you think the founder has what it takes to make it happen? We all have homogeneity bias. It just means we trust what looks, feels, talks like us. We all do it. And so when you're doing early seed stage investing or early stage investing, the more you have in common with someone, the more you just trust and believe that they're gonna get done what they say they're gonna get done. So it just continues this cycle. What's been promising the past few years is that more women have come into the market, more diverse fund managers by racial means have come into the market. However, the percentage has also just stayed the same. So both on the funder side as well as the amount of money deploying to the founders. So what's encouraging is there's more people coming in that are diverse. However, it still proportionally hasn't been shifting, which is somewhat discouraging and is like fuel to my fire every single day. There's you guys probably, I think we all probably see this, just like there's kind of greenwashing that happens, there's a lot of talk and discussion about diversity in venture, but not as much action that follows up. And again, it just goes back to this hurdle of trying to get over the deal flow that comes in and your networks and having to go outside of those networks and having to trust something that feels riskier than what you're used to when you're a fiduciary. That being said, for example, like my fund or some of the other amazing women-led funds or funds that focus on women or funds that focus on people of color, what we're starting to see, the data and research has been around for a while when it comes to women-led companies, even in venture capital, like they have over 64% higher returns. So that's great. The data's out there to support it. We are now starting to see that data with people of color as well, which is even more fantastic, which is encouraging kind of the naysayers or encouraging people that they have to find that high alpha in different areas than what they've typically invested in. As part of that wave, what's also encouraging is, you start to, again, when you start to change the makeup of who's writing the check, then you start to make up of who's getting the check. And you start to change the type of companies that are invested in the sense of, I'm invested in a company right now, Styx, they're absolutely wonderful. It's a women's health company. And, we invested in their very first round, and I remember they're like, they came and talked to us and they talked about UTI, yeast, pregnancy, ovulation, and I was like, yeah, no, I get it. Reoccurs, happens to all these women. They're like, oh my gosh, it's just, this is the first pitch that I didn't have to spend 45 minutes on the problem. Because who they're usually pitching to are guys who are like, I don't know, what's the yeast infection? Like, does that happen often? Can I even say that? Is this wrong to say? Can I talk to you about yeast infections, right? They, again, wrongly assumed like pregnancy tests. They're like, yeah, but you just kind of like take it and like you're done, right? And they're like, no, there are people who take half half of their customers take pregnancy tests because they don't get their period and they want to confirm that they're not pregnant. And this was like mind-blowing to the male sex, right? And so, again, when you change the makeup of who's investing, you start to really change the makeup of the companies and the problems that we're solving in market. And that's more on the consumer side. There's some really interesting things on the B2B side. There's one company I'm not invested in, fantastic company out of Seattle, that they use AI for empathy training, in the sense that it's a plugin for your Outlook, it's a plugin for Word, where as you're typing, it gives you suggestions on how to be more empathetic in your communication. And that's being put forth in different businesses and customer service centers. Again, something I would argue would probably have taken a little bit longer to be a solution had it not been for the founding team who had a really strong focus on empathy and training and research in that space. So the encouraging thing is that there's still such a far way to go in venture capital, but venture capital is so impactful on what can be in the future. And there is starting to be a shift in funding going to, the women's health space, we've seen more and more funding going into that space, so it's encouraging. The amount of menopause companies I see, the amount of companies I see around maternal health, which the US is one of the poorest rates for a developed country. And so it's starting to shift the conversation. Funding is starting to go there. Do I want it to be more faster? Yes, but it's encouraging, it's going slightly in that direction.
That's super.
Yeah.
I'm going to get to you in a second, Jason. But one thing, just listening to you talk, Carolyn, is I think I have the benefit to, you came into the office, we've talked, and you were talking about how you select founders and you really start looking at them as people, right? And then the passion. And I'm sure you just heard, how Caroline's talking right now. She's got passion for it. And that's like the number one thing I think should remember to ourselves, right, is make sure you're talking to the person, at the same level, look for the passion, and look for the action. And I think there's a lot more opportunity that would open up. It's not just male dominated, right? There's a lot of talented women, minorities, Latinx, African American. There's even an article, I love the title of it, the article in Outside Online recently about black farmers. And the title was like, just because you don't see us doesn't mean we're not here, right? And I think there's too many excuses about, Portland's too white, or Portland's like, whatever, not diverse. And I think that's kind of a BS excuse, right?
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I'm like taking it, but okay,
I like listening to
when
you,
you're raising
Caroline.
a fund to invest in women in the VC world, here are the questions you get. Well, you get lots of questions. You get lots of really inappropriate questions too. But are there actually women-led companies out there that you can back? And then I give them the stats that 46% of all US businesses are women-led, and that growth rate is 112%. Macro, women are graduating at higher rates, are filing more patents than ever. So that's great. Supply is there. And then you get questions around, I don't see any women-led companies, so they just must not be there, or they're all consumer. And then I have to do this whole education on homogeneity bias, and it's all about your network. So yes, if you just stay in your lane and you don't try to go to a different lane, then you're not gonna find those. And then the worst question I get is, how do you make the trade-off that you're trying to, you're ultimately in VC, you have to return 300% or more to your investors to stay in the game, but you're investing in women. I'm like, whoa, inherently in that question, there's some really serious bias and issues with that. And then I talk about how, listen, if nothing else, just look at this market arbitrage. You have a pool, and you have all this fish in the pool, and everybody's crowded around, driving up the valuations of those companies, all trying to fight to get into the same exact companies that look exactly like you, or kind of the bro-y, rah-rah-rah. And then you have this pool of incredible talent that's growing, capital efficient, has the fight, the underdog fight, knows how to I gotta get to profitability, I know how to make that happen. And has such a big fight in it because it's not just for their ego, it's for so much more, that they're gonna work their butt off to make it happen, and nobody else is trying to invest in that space. So you get to invest, be super impactful, get great valuations, and by the time that those companies grow, it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, because money loves numbers, and if you have the numbers, you're going to make money. And so when I frame it that way, they're like, oh, and I'm like, all right, well, at least I got you somehow. However I need to get you there, beyond that's like the right thing to do to invest in majority population, I'm glad we got there.
No, that's a great point. Okay, switching gears a little bit, Jason, because I was eavesdropping on you and Caroline in the back, and you joined 2 years ago?
MISO?
Yeah, or 18.
About a year ago.
A year ago, okay. So we had the pandemic. I'm thinking about this opportunities and challenges question. So just talk about when you joined, because there's some ton of opportunities that was created through the pandemic and the level of interest, right, that wanted to support what MISO is doing in those communities, right?
Right. I mean, so our clientele are 70% people of color, 60% women, 40% women of color. So we kind of came into the pandemic and George Floyd at the intersection of economic development and equity. So, you know, I think that the opportunities are there, and we saw coming out of the pandemic so many people rethinking their lives and wanting to take what was a side hustle or this talent that they had and make it a business and not have to, you know, try to go from job to job and figure out what to do with, you know, when my unemployment runs out. So the opportunity was there, and which was fantastic to see. The challenge is that the growth and the need out there in meeting it, because there's just a lot of demand within this community for people trying to create better situations for themselves.
And are you, just to follow on, are you seeing, I'm curious about the industries and the companies that, you know, are looking for loans, if you can share some of that.
Yeah, it's actually quite diverse across an industry spectrum. So the real challenge is, you know, how do you underwrite someone who wants to make a business? Most of our borrowers have credit scores that wouldn't get them through a bank underwriting process. And is that credit score a result of, you know, being trapped in a cycle of poverty, or is it indicative of bad payment history? So it's also trying to rethink how we approach our underwriting and supporting people, to build their credit. So we have credit classes that they can go to, and we give them a $100 loan, and then they pay us back 10 payments of $10, 0 interest, and we report that to the credit bureau so they can establish and improve their credit, and just helping them understand how that impacts their ability to, you know, pay for insurance, get loans, and just really kind of help people overcome those barriers, and so that, you know, eventually they can go to a bank and get a loan. So it's really just trying to rethink how do we underwrite and do it in a way that doesn't perpetuate some of the systemic racism that's, you know, kind of happened in banking historically.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of that does go, what we're talking about, right? It goes back to the people, like making, you know, spending time with them, making sure they've got the character, right? I mean, that's probably some more qualitative aspects of underwriting. Yeah,
you know, and our loss ratio historically has been like under 0.6%, which is really good. And, you know, I think it's part of the process that we're also building a community. We're really spending time with our borrowers. We're getting to know them, know their stories. You know, we have a very culturally competent staff that we speak 10 languages throughout the organization. So the challenge is also that there's no way you can do a $20,000 loan to someone and spend that much time with them and train them and do it. There's no interest rate that would compensate you for that. So fortunately, we rely on you know, partners and investors that allow us to do that.
Okay. I have no idea what time it is, but I wanted to get more to the meat of. Well, and again, I want to take some questions and figure out what your maybe concerns are or how you want to get involved, but really get to the point of like, how can you translate whatever your value is and passion is into, you know, how do you invest that, or how do you implement your goals, right? And you know, we came up with a couple, 3-4 things, and then I want to turn it over to the crowd. You know, one, you know, I could go to Jason, who runs a pizza shop, and I could write him a check and invest in his company, right? Because I believe in him. So that's like one way I could invest my dollars personally, really simplified. A lot of you probably work at an organization, or you own that organization. you can go to them and encourage them to be more active and proactive about, or even asking them, like, how are you investing my retirement, or how are you investing the profit sharing plan I'm in, whatever the mechanism is.
Yeah, if you went to a
Right.
college, you should ask that your college endowment, where
Yeah.
where are they investing their money?
Right.
You'll get some interesting answers.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's some other smaller ones, right? People write. I wanted you to touch on this a little bit, Caroline. Is people will make charitable donations to nonprofits, and that's some way to go. But I know you had some example.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think charity is absolutely needed, and there is a huge value of nonprofits that exist in our world. It was really interesting. So when I was fundraising, or in my fundraising journey for Rogue, which is in venture capital, so less than 4% of women invest in venture capital on the LP side. It's about 3% if you're any other minority. Many of the women that
LP is an investor.
Huh?
LP is an investor, right?
Yeah, sorry.
Investor
An
side.
LP is an investor. Thanks for breaking down my industry chat. Many of the women that I was speaking with who are at the kind of much higher net worth, or even some women who are accredited, they've been working at Nike for 20 years, they're accredited, they had a budget set aside for how much they wanted to donate every year, from pretty smaller donation bucket all the way to a pretty hefty and large donation bucket for some high net worth individuals or small family offices. And I would share with them what we're doing, and they were just like, yeah, but I'm not in charge of investing, or my financial planner, like, investing is not my thing, and I'd rather just donate it. And I had to shift the conversation a little bit. Obviously, there's some slightly different tax implications, but I had to shift the conversation to, what is the impact that you want to have with those donation dollars? What are you trying to achieve with your donation dollars? And and then explain to them how many of what they wanted to achieve was also in alignment with what we were doing, with the only other additional but huge benefit being that they could get capital back that allows them to expand that impact even more. So for example, I framed it to an individual who honestly probably could care less about our actual return profile. I said, in 3 years, we invested $2.1 million. And in that $2.1 million, 11 companies hired over 285 employees. 85% of them were women and people of color. More importantly, those companies went on to raise $32 million, which is money they brought into their ecosystem. So you have 16x leverage on that. And by the way, over 50% of our investors are women. So the returns that do come back ultimately financially impact those women and fundamentally change their financial livelihood. I was like, so just consider on the impact, you can actually have significant impact, even if it's investing and it's not what you do, or you only do grant, or you only do donation based. And that's been a really interesting and more challenging conversation to have with people who honestly haven't flexed that muscle of risk. Either they don't know about venture, or they're like, oh, startup investing is for really rich people, which there is a certain level of wealth that goes into it, and I'm not going to deny that, but it's also very accessible. And I highly encourage people who are accredited to consider, there's different ways now and different avenues that allow people to participate, especially recently with crowdfunding. People can put as little as like $500, $1,000 and put it towards a company that's really aligned with what they want to do. They might lose everything, right? But if you donated it, you would have lost it, and you also get to do a tax write-off if you lose all the money in the investment. Or something happens, that company grows, they hire people, they build a company, and maybe you get a return, and maybe that return is really great, and then you get to reinvest that and have even more impact, right? So you can start with, if you're not accredited, there's platforms that allow not accredited investors to go with very small chunks of money, all the way to, if you're accredited, there's funds, there's opportunities to invest in companies directly, or if you use guys like these guys, they can help you if you're like even more accredited and have higher amounts of wealth. But there's options, and I think my biggest ask is, if you've ever been a person, because I was that person, who thought, that world's not for me, my push is, just look into it and see, push yourself into that world, because we need this world to have more people that really represent the fabric of our society.
Yeah, I mean, even bringing back, you don't even need to have that much money. You could sign up, there's the technology platforms for wealth advising. There's a million of them out there. I know like one thing we work with clients, because we do have clients that are non-accredited, we'll work with them with a program called Just Invest, and we can go through, you fill out a questionnaire and you highlight exactly what you care about and want to do, and Just Invest will then manipulate and buy exactly what you just explained. Yeah, so you're actively participating in what you want to invest in.
There's also newer technology. I mean, this is not financial advice, but there is newer technology out there. You know, one of the things that I personally, I'm pretty involved in my own finances, but I was like, wait a second, I have this IRA that my only options are to invest like in the public market, and I was like, but I want to invest in things that I want to invest in. And then I found a platform that's like, yeah, you can invest in IRA into what you want to invest in. And so I was like, and I'm moving my money over here. Yeah. Riskier, of course, but I was like, if I'm going to be holding money forever, I want to decide, I want to be able to put my money where I want to, and not just like on what's offered to me on the public platform.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's newer technology that came out that the consumer can now use.
Okay. Okay. So is there any takers to raise hands and ask any questions, or are you looking for, if anybody's looking for, how to get more involved? Yeah. Do we have a runner, a mic runner?
I can speak really loud.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm curious about your take on what I've heard of, like this new type of investor that's looking more about returns in the form of impact as opposed to, say, 300x money. Yeah. And do you agree with that? Is that a thing?
Yeah, it's funny, on my note card, I had return expectations. So I don't know, again, everybody on here probably has a different opinion. My opinion is that what we invest in is impactful, and it's not sacrificing returns. So, but there's a difference, right? I think it comes down, going back to intentional investing, it comes down to each individual's needs. So if you and I are talking and you really just want to drive towards your impact, however you define that, if it's to support a specific community in Portland, you probably would sacrifice some returns, but there's ways around, like contributing to MISO, right? Because I think MISO takes $50,000 minimums, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that you have to sacrifice impact and return. I don't think those are mutually exclusive. There are venture funds like this that just target community populations that are underserved by the rest of the market. We have a fund that is mostly invested in by foundations that offers a bond equivalent yield. Basically, it's illiquid, but it funds us doing loans and helps us do what we do. And you're getting a boring bond return just like you would in the market. So,
I was just thinking, do you have? Yeah, I think that is a common question that gets asked. I just think we're past what that means. I don't think you should ever have to sacrifice, and like it shouldn't be, right? It's exclusive. I don't think it should. Making an impact investment shouldn't sacrifice any return.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not deep in this space, but I think it was just in the past 3 years, you might have better numbers around this. I think the amount of money raised specifically in venture for climate is something north of like 20 billion. And none of those funds have any anticipation that they're going to do less than 300% return, but they're investing in incredible technologies that will come to market 10 years from now. Some technologies that are deep in development, but they absolutely tie high returns to that investment, all with the ultimate goal of helping the planet in multiple ways through their climate research and investing. Any other questions?
What? Do we still have some time?
We do. I actually wanted to ask a quick question of Jason, if I could. Mm-hmm. Could you talk a little bit more about the $100 loan and whether that has more to do with the entrepreneurial side and companies or founders that you're trying to invest in, or is an anti-poverty measure?
It's really an anti-poverty measure, but it's also a community service that we just found that was a real barrier for entrepreneurs and people getting started, or immigrants coming to this country. They can't do anything because they don't have any credit established. So it was it's a very popular program that anyone can join, and it's really just an educational benefit. There's a $10 fee, I think. I think that is the cost for it, and no interest. So to take a class and get a $100 loan, and which will be reported to your credit. So, make the $10 payments is my advice too.
I think you bring up an interesting part of this, though. I think anytime that you combine investing with impact, I think a key component is education that comes with it, and helping support both, for example, in our fund, support the people who are investing in the fund and the entrepreneurs in ways that further enables them to be successful. So I love that you guys have tons of training and different elements to it, but then also set them up to be able to get loans, right? Something on our side, it's very small, but in the venture world, it's kind of more novel. But we created kind of an access opportunity level investment. I won't get into the details, but it allows someone who's accredited to invest in our fund for a pretty small amount, which is unheard of in VC. But then we have 3 seminars a month around how do you even look at an investment? How do you look at a company? What do you do? And then it's a really community focus for the investor education. And then on the entrepreneur side, we host tons of things to help them. We're very hands-on investors. But then embedded in our model, we actually share a portion of the upside of the fund with them. So by investing in them, we also make them automatic investors into our fund that they don't have to buy into, so they share in the upside. But we couple that with a personal financial coach, so they can start to build their own personal financial wealth. We have a leadership coach, family stipend, other stuff. But we try to figure out ways to further enable support of that founder. And I think part of it, you can go to, well, that's a very nice thing to do. But I also explain to people, just like when you're building a great company and you're intentional about your internal culture and you provide benefits to employees, you do it because you know that if you can help mitigate the stress that a founder feels around their business, or a founder or an employee feels around their mental health, their familial health, their financial health, they're going to show up as a better founder, building a better company, which is better for anybody who's invested in them. So I think that's a key element that's probably not talked about enough, but I think it's really important.
Well, and we find that kind of just building community success will lead to success as our graduates start successful businesses and can mentor other upstart businesses, that to kind of create a virtuous circle, and really a cycle of mentorship will really build community resilience and wealth in communities that haven't really seen that kind of investment before. So
yeah, it changes the cycle.
When you talk about making an impact with your investments, a lot of the impacts that people make it's exponential. Like, it reaches out into all kinds of different areas and ways, and it's pretty subjective. And how have you found ways that you can measure and demonstrate that to investors, to say, not just here's your return, which is easy to measure, but here are the impacts you made in a measurable way?
Yeah, for us, it's pretty small right now, but we do measure number of jobs created, amount of money that those companies raised as kind of money coming into the economy in which that company sits. We measure the diversity makeup of the employees in which that company has hired. And then moving forward, we're also going to measure the number of women served by those companies where applicable. So those are some initial measures. We are looking at potentially measuring our low income impact areas in condition with kind of one of our investors looking at that space. So also socioeconomic impact of our fund based on who we fund and who they hire.
Yeah, I think that's one of the more challenging things to do, is measuring impact, because we also track the number of jobs created and number of business upstarts. But the long-term implications of creating intergenerational wealth, are just huge in narrowing wealth gaps and communities building political power because they have wealth to advocate for themselves. I mean, there's huge ramifications that trickle out that are really difficult to measure. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'll bring two small examples to light about that. One, outside the Rope Women's Fund, but we invested in a founder who came from, kind of grew up on the other side of the track, so to speak, right? Just came from a poor background, self-taught, hustled, built the business, had a really sizable exit. That founder then invested over $10 million into other startups in that ecosystem. And then he also provided the mentorship. And he's now started another company. So it just creates a cycle. On a personal level, one of the founders that we've invested in, was our first investment, was the classic reason of why I wake up in the morning. It was this woman who, she didn't have an MBA, didn't have a college degree. She taught herself how to code. She built her first iteration of her database. I saw huge opportunities in the commercial construction market, so it's massive. And, I tried to get other people to fund her. And they're like, well, she's not technical enough. She doesn't have an MBA. She hasn't been a founder before. I don't know, we just need more traction. All the typical things, the biases that we hear. And so we led around, we got other people in. That was 3 years ago. And when I first met her, she's like, how do I structure a board meeting? What should I present? Very confident in what she knew, but also not confident in kind of her full presence of being a leader. Fast forward 3 years later, she's acquired 2 companies for all stock deals. She comes to the board meeting, she's like, here's the pre-read, here are the 2 strategic things I need you to do. By the way, here's what's going on with the team, boom, boom, boom. The intangible aspect right there is that there is this woman that, and if you're an underrepresented person, you get this, has always been overlooked or always been kind of told no, even though they believe in themselves and believe that they can. And then finally got that opportunity, took that opportunity, and now is in a space that no matter what happens with the business, she owns it. She's a boss, and other people see that. Her daughter sees that. The employees that she has hired see that. So that's a mental transition that shows other people beyond the money that you can do it and that you can own your own power when you step into it. And that's something that I don't know how to translate that to numbers and impact for people, but that's what wakes me up in the morning. Sorry, get passionate.
All right, one more. Yes, I love questions.
Thank you all for being here today. Curious for those of you that work with companies that are able to create jobs, if when it comes to talent acquisition and acquisition of diverse talent, have you seen challenges in that space? Because there's this, what I like to refer to as the myth of the talent pipeline, that it's so hard to find diverse talent. Have you encountered challenges in that space, or have you seen creative approaches to addressing, maybe positions sitting there for a long time and not being filled when there's a critical need in these businesses that you're funding? We'd love to hear your thoughts.
I mean, I will tell you that from our borrowers and our clients' perspective, it's a challenge. Just the rising cost of labor and creating different pushes and pulls, but from our organization, we have not had a really difficult time having a diverse recruitment process. But once again, I think we're advantaged in that we're entrenched in a diverse community, and our staff is already very diverse, and I think that's attractive along with our mission. So yes, we see it in our clients. From an organizational perspective, we've been able to overcome that. But I think that's something that also creates success. The more diverse you become, the more easier it is to attract diverse candidates, so they're not walking into just a very undiverse place looking around going, ooh, where's the door? Let me get out of here. So I think that it's one of those things where success will breed success.
I think this is more of a general comment, but it kind of goes to underrepresented, trade skill positions, right? People that may not have college degrees is what I've seen is, and I don't know what the full impact's going to be, but I've seen companies and talk to CEOs that are really focused on, can we develop something in-house where we're actively reaching out and developing a mentorship program with employees and bringing them in. But that's a challenge, right? Because you got to have the right HR team, you got to have the right admin, and you've really got to be, you got to spend the resources on it to do it, right? So that's just generally, I've seen that on the trade side, as well as like we try to encourage some of the RCOs to really think about how can you generate a pipeline of talent and getting them engaged in some way before they're even hired, right?
So related to that, so I'll speak internally. I'll be totally honest. It is challenging when hiring into the VC industry. There's not a course you take in venture capital or a degree you get in venture capital, much like how I got great mentorship from Tom. It requires someone taking that time and effort and mentorship, which on the LP, the people who are investing in our funds, they don't reward or provide you resources for that additional mentorship or taking that time. You're often kind of a little bit more hamstrung on your management fee, unless you're a really, really sizable fund, to focus on kind of bringing in that next generation and mentoring them. What we have done to help with that is we created kind of a emerging manager in residence position. So really essentially a mentorship opportunity, what you were talking about, to build that mentorship, get that person working with us, get them that exposure and experience, and then obviously if they're a good fit, as we grow and we can afford to bring on other people, then we've developed a little bit more of that talent pipeline to bring in. On our company side, definitely, when things were in the crazy hiring, especially because we invest in tech companies, so the engineering side it was hard to hire an engineer, period. I will say the benefit, and it is true that the research says that when you invest in diverse founders, they generally hire more diverse teams. I've actually had the conversation with 3 companies that they need more diverse teams, but not in the way that you think. Like they need to add a white male to their team. Like you need to add diversity because you're covered everywhere else. So you got to get some dudes on this team right now, which they actually ended up doing. But I would say there's always challenges on the engineering talent side, and I'm lucky to work with CEOs that really go above and beyond to find different organizations that are developing diverse engineers and tapping into them and getting them in the company some way. I would say at the CTO level, it's still very heavy, kind of traditional white males in that sense.
Well, I would say just, Caroline, Jason, and I are good resources. So I'm a big fan of paying it forward. So if you have, a personal idea or if you have. Yeah. Okay, I hear you. Any specific industry? Tech. Okay. Might be a good.
Yeah.
Yeah. One last comment. Sorry. The more macro comment is what I think is interesting about. You mentioned talent has been hard, but it is improving. And so if you pay attention, the stock market has not done well this year. You see Google and Meta and these other tech companies tightening their belts and laying people off. And so what that's going to lead to is a lot more talented people out there in the field. And then it's almost like spores. It's going to create new companies and the opportunity to start new companies. And that talent's going to be looking for jobs. And I hope, I don't know what's going to happen, but I hope then those companies are even more diverse than they are now, right? But I like that idea, like a pipeline or a program for you if you want to get involved in tech. All right.
Oh, one
Jillian?
more. Okay.
So the things that all 3 of you do are kind of niche, but if you look out into the broader investment world, do you feel like you're seeing this sort of awareness and shift? Like how much is it happening in the broader investment world and the markets? And on the other side of that, how much do you think greenwashing is happening out there? Like how prevalent is that?
You probably have the best view.
Yeah, I think the greenwashing is very prevalent. Just going back to that ETF comment, and what people are selling now is more just, they're kind of leaning onto your emotions. but in reality, it's the same companies that you were invested in prior. But it's tough because I've been, looking at such niche early stage stuff for so long that I do feel a little in a bubble. And I don't know if other firms have like fully come around to, because going back to Caroline's comment, it's a lot of education, it's a lot of education of walking people through like exactly what you're investing in, what the returns expectations could be. It's just different. And so that's not really an answer, but.
I mean, having come from the Northwest Health Foundation and looking to weave impact into our endowment, and over the last, 10 years, when I started there, you could hardly find anything, and now there's firms like Caroline's, now there's the Elevate Inclusive Fund. There's not only are there impact investments, there's local ways targeted impact investments are available. And I think it's going to be a while before those trickle into your 401k options, but it is trending the right way. I've seen a huge increase in awareness and also a lot more historical data now that proves that when you're investing for impact, you're not necessarily not getting returns. So.
My quick answer is, no, it's not shifting. It's in the macro scheme, it's still such a small slice of the big money out there. So.
Yeah, no other questions. I really appreciate you guys' time taking to listen to us, and if there's anything we can do, just come grab us and talk to us one-on-one.